Welcome back, folks. My name is LastKnownMeal, and today we're going to be talking about Elex. So this is going to be my review of the game after 4 years. Now, honestly, for the past couple of days, I was just playing Elex like crazy because there is honestly nothing else to play. And because we have Elex 2 coming out next year, I decided to revisit this and see what sort of plus and minuses does this game have. And for everyone who didn't play it yet, maybe this video will serve as a nice little introduction to the game. And if you like it, you're going to play it. So Elex 1 came out on October 17th, 2017. It was released by Piranha Bytes, the legendary creators of Gothic and Risen franchise, especially Gothic, one of the most legendary RPGs of all time. So these people know how to make an RPG, and Elex was kind of a new IP they wanted to produce. And because Piranha Bytes like to do trilogies, it's safe to assume, because we have Elex 2 coming out next year, that this is also going to be a trilogy. But nevertheless, let's go back to Elex 1. So Elex 1, the world itself, is sort of a mix between modern and old, and it takes place on a world called Magalan after the catastrophic events basically wiped out the humanity that we know today. So the people you have then, in the game are basically the successors of this humanity, and you can actually see the remains of the ancient civilization, of the old civilization as they like to call it, of us people, because how much time has passed. And this whole hybrid of combining bows and swords with guns and basically rocket launchers was a very interesting thing, and for some people that wasn't really good, for some it was. Personally, for me, I don't mind it. But let's go over the general information. First and foremost, this game is an RPG. As it was with previous Piranha Bytes games, you kind of progress throughout the game by joining and working with different factions. So if you want to kind of progress through your story, you have to work with those factions, as it was before. Now, every faction itself does its good and bad things. Obviously, every single faction is entirely different from one another, and that's actually helpful if you want to join each one. So first off, if you're gonna be going for berserkers, these are most of your swords and bows and magic kind of fighters. They're gonna be using those ancient weaponry, and they're gonna be the one with the nature, rather from, for example, clerics, who are mostly oriented towards technology. And you can see in their base you have all sorts of mechas, you have robots, you have them with machine guns and assault rifles, so they're pretty advanced. And on the other side you have the outlaws, who are basically like bandits. They do their own thing, like they're just gonna be doing their own thing. They are actually set in a desert area of the map, so basically they are inherently different from these two, because berserkers and clerics maintain a certain order, meanwhile the outlaws really don't. So you have to decide where to go and what you want to do. Besides that, obviously in the game you have the classic stats, going from the stats of your characters that you actually get as you progress through every level, and also you actually have skills, like for example one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, guns, lockpicking and everything else that you can only learn from trainers. And that was always the case in Piranha Bytes games. You don't really click on the button, you have to go to a person, and that person, who specializes in certain form of training for a certain skill, is going to teach you that skill. But before you go to that person, you need to have a learning point. So from that perspective, you also have that. When it comes to the map itself, the map is generally huge, especially because you have to walk through it, so you have no mounts in the game. One way you can actually fast travel is by uncovering various portals and teleporters throughout the map. You can freely click on it anywhere on the map and it's going to transport you there. So if you actually want to go on foot and you want to explore the world itself, you can. But also if you want to use a teleporter and kind of make things a little bit faster after you discover that portal, you can do that as well with no penalties. So from that standpoint, the game is really not too tedious. Also, when it comes to the gameplay itself, the world is open, so you're free to explore and go wherever you want. And one of the good things when it comes to Piranha Bytes games is that you can pretty much, the game tells you kinda where to go in the beginning, but you don't really have to go in that direction. You can just turn around and go somewhere else and start doing quests for other people. But also keep in mind, obviously those areas might be inhabited by a lot stronger monsters, etc, etc. So from that standpoint, you have a lot of freedom to do whatever you want questing wise, and also when it comes to your character, you have a lot of freedom to create a character the way you want to create it. You have the toolbar down there, so you can swap out weapons, change them, put all sorts of potions and magic you can actually wield when you're playing as that character. But also keep in mind, as it is in any Piranha Bytes games, you're playing with a predefined character. One more thing when it comes to questing is definitely how quests are done in Piranha Bytes games, because the quest is going to be, let's say you have to bring me this or that, but at the same time there are many ways you can finish each quest. Not every quest, but most of the quests can be finished if you think outside of the box. For example, if there are doors that you cannot go through because there is a guard there, you can actually go around and, for example, land on that platform using your jetpack that you have in the game, ultimately avoiding to go through that guard, or you can bribe him or do whatever. So there are various ways you can finish most quests. Some of those quests are going to be go kill these monsters, etc, etc. You're going to go there, get the monsters, go back, finish the quest. There is also one thing though, that questing is alright. The boss battles though, they can be a little bit tedious and a little bit boring. And they were kinda underwhelming because, I won't spoil anything, but I'll just say they were underwhelming because of the animations and just how that boss fight was planned in the first place, where it doesn't really have that moment to it where it's going to be more challenging or different than your regular enemies, so it kind of becomes tedious, at least when it comes to fighting bosses. Everything else is pretty much okay when it comes to that questing side of the story. Now let's talk about combat. Combat is probably one of the jankiest things you can have in Elex 1, especially because the combats from time to time can be extremely unresponsive. The camera can get in your way, and when you're fighting an enemy, things might not go your way. And for a video game, which is difficult, because every single Piranha Bytes game is difficult, on the map, on like one part of the map, you might have level 1 monsters, and just next to them you might have like end game monsters that you cannot fight. So you have to kind of navigate your way through Megaland, throughout this world, as it was with any previous Piranha Bytes game, because if you attack an enemy which you shouldn't, you're going to die. And the world of Piranha Bytes is set in a way that it inclines you to return to the same place after you get stronger, because then you will be able to fight those enemies, not before that. So when you have to fight those enemies who are a little bit dangerous and your HP can go down a lot, a huge problem to that becomes with combat. There aren't too many animations you can kind of choose when you're fighting. Everything is basically press left mouse button and try to basically dodge the attack. Sometimes those monsters are going to be almost glitched, where they're going to attack you 30 times without you having an ability to recover. So if you're fighting 3 enemies, they're going to be attacking you at the same time, and there is going to be a slight delay between their attacks, and every time they attack you, you're basically staggered. So if you end up being in that situation, there is no way of getting out unless you have jetpack on you, like, or well, battery in that jetpack, but most of the time you cannot even fly away. So from that standpoint, combat is not really that enjoyable. Later on, as you get stronger, as you get better weapons, you can see actually from this gameplay, like, fighting enemies can be really fun. But even then, like, you will be in certain situations where I will wield my weapon, it's not going to hit, or the enemy is gonna do something, it's gonna spaz out, and it's just not going to be a very enjoyable experience, especially if you lock onto an enemy. You basically have an ability to lock or unlock the highlight of the enemy, which you're going to focus. By highlighting the enemy and basically targeting that one enemy, the camera becomes tedious to the point where I never use lock-on camera in their games. I just don't. When it comes to Elex, I always avoid it because it always kind of makes the camera go everywhere, and fighting more enemies can become really tedious. Now also there are some problems with some weapons being more overpowered than the others. For example, if you are using a gun, a rifle, you're gonna be 10 times stronger. So if you're using that rifle instead of the sword or a bow, like, those weapons just rip and tear through enemies. And until you get a strong melee weapon, the ranged weapon is always going to be kind of the case you're gonna be using. But the melee weapons, especially at start, can be extremely low damage, to the point where it just becomes tedious, and I've noticed that a lot of my builds that I was doing in this game, they always revolve around using a rifle. Always, because they're just too overpowered. And may I remind you, you also have a rocket launcher in this game, so bow or rocket launcher, I mean, it's an easy decision. I just wish every single weapon was a little bit, had more details to it when you were fighting, but at the same time it's okay, because I realize that this is a small team and, you know, they don't have the funding. I mean, they didn't have it back then, which they could make this game stand out even more, which I do hope happens now with Elex 2, because now they were bought by THQ Nordic. That's one thing. And the second thing, you can see they have a higher budget for that game than they had for Elex 1. But nevertheless, when it comes to combat, besides that, like, it's pretty okay, but if there is gonna be the biggest minus, is definitely gonna be that. Now, when it comes to the world design of this game, that's probably one of the strongest elements of Elex, because Piranha Bytes is known to create worlds which are basically just stunning, and everywhere in that world you're going to find something. So if you're gonna be exploring the world, if you're gonna be going around various nooks and crannies around different trees, different buildings, different waterfalls, there is always going to be something to pick up, something to take, either an herb or, let's say, a weapon or something which can help you later on from materials ongoing, etc, etc. So that was the case with every single Piranha Bytes game. Their world design is top tier. Their ideas when it comes to the world design, the amount of verticality the game has, the amount of cliffs and edges and caves and just various biomes, because you can actually see here, you can go from a very nice, you know, greenish foresty biome to, let's say, to the crater, which is basically where the meteorite hit the Megalon and became this ruined land. Or you can go to the desert, or you can go to the snowy areas where you have the actual elves. Now, keep in mind, elves are a faction in this game, as I said, but they're not playable faction. You cannot join them. But overall, when it comes to just different areas, when it comes to the design of the cities, when it just comes to the functionality of the cities, because it's not always about design, it's not always about the size of the map, it's also about what you put in and how you organize that map. Piranha Bytes was always good in that. They know how to make a smaller world feel big and feel substantial, because there is always something to find, and Elex 1 doesn't lack that. That's why I'm excited about Elex 2, because exploration is extremely strong with these games. Now, exploration at first when you're low level can be a little bit tricky, because you will mostly end up, you know, fighting an enemy which is going to destroy you in 2 hits. But it's later on, when you get proper gear, or when you're just exploring and doing quests, like, that exploration is always going to be really good side of it. And when you combine it with these graphics, which are a little bit cartoony, a little bit realistic, like something in between, they actually achieve a really nice synthesis here. But that's what I'm afraid of Elex 2, because they're actually in Elex 2, they're a little bit pushing too much towards realism, and hopefully doesn't reflect too much on the world being bland and being just stale, which is what Elex 1 didn't have, because there is always something to find. And it's not boring, the environment is not boring, especially with the use of jetpack. You will be able to get to certain heights where you can just find certain chests and stuff to pick up, even weapons who are a lot stronger than the weapons you're able to buy or craft, especially early on. And even if you are following, you know, certain things around the map, you're gonna be getting stuff that you didn't even have to buy, like certain armor at the beginning, weapons, as I said, potions, etc, etc. Now, when it comes to graphics, when it comes to benchmarking, when it comes to just how this game runs on my PC, so Elex is running on Genome Engine. This is their, I believe, in-house engine they're using. I believe Genome Engine was also used for Risen and Gothic 3. Gothic 2 and Gothic 1 were using something different, but at the same time, this engine saw the most amount of overhauls and, you know, different, you know, things being added into it when Elex was being made. Because if you look at Risen 3 and Elex 1, it's a huge jump, insane jump from Risen 3, which I do believe personally is their weakest game that Piranha Bytes has ever released. In my taste and me playing all of their games from before, that was their weakest one. But nevertheless, I'm running this on Ultra. This is running on i7-7700 and 3070 Ti, 16 gigs of RAM. It's installed on an SSD, I believe. think I installed it on SSD, but nevertheless, I checked the SSD and hard drive version, it's basically running the same. Maybe you have like 2 or 3 frames less, but you can actually see here I was achieving 90 to 100 to 110 frames. Now the you know, sometimes it can be a little bit not even buggy, I wouldn't say it's not glitchy. Sometimes it can run into certain hiccups, but most of the time this engine was running without issues, and not even on 3070 Ti. When I was running this on 1060, when I was running this on 1070, I was able to actually play this game without any special issues, without losing too many frame rates. And keep in mind, like, this is all on ultra. I pushed it as much as I could, and I'm still getting this frame rate, and wherever I go it's pretty much the same. So it's not like in one area it's gonna be 110, 114, another is gonna be 80. No, it kind of keeps the same amount of frames throughout the entire game and throughout every part of the map, and on that sense that's okay. So at least when it comes to that optimization, when it comes to how much the engine itself is using your PC and how much it's using your GPU and CPU, it's alright. And I do believe that if you have a normally modern PC, you won't be able to run this, and you will be able to run this even on low if you have a really, you know, old PC, because now obviously people have problems buying GPUs because, well, you know, the market is the way it is. And how well did Elex 1 age? Well, I actually think it aged pretty well. Even though it came out in 2017, I played it and I still have a lot of fun in it. And I believe that if I went on and to, you know, join a different faction, I still kind of experienced the story in a different way, differently from when I experienced it the first time. So obviously, I like this game. I think it's a very solid game with the budget they actually had. There is going to be jank, there is going to be bugs and glitches, especially with combat, but it wasn't to the point where it was annoying, and it's definitely not to the point where you have releases of today with releasing with a completely unstable state. That wasn't the case with Elex. So just, you know, besides those underwhelming factors from boss fights and problems with combat, everything else was kind of nice. And even today, when I look at the graphics, when I look at everything, the game holds out really well, and that's because the level design was handmade. So every single part of the map was done by a person. It wasn't done by an AI, or it wasn't done by a program, or it wasn't randomly generated. Everything is done by people, and that's why every single nook and cranny of the game has its soul in it. And that's, I believe, the strongest part of this, with all of its problems, especially with the difficulty. That's also a big thing. Like, at the beginning of the game, it can be brutal. Enemies are gonna be one-shotting you, and remember to save, but nevertheless, if you manage to get through these first couple of hours where the game can be extremely difficult, when you get a piece of armor, but that was always the case with Piranha Bytes games, you will be able to just enjoy it. But like, obviously a lot of people, when they see the first couple of hours of the game, where they see how difficult it can be even on the easiest difficulty, like, that's like difficulty here, it doesn't matter so much. Like, put it on normal, put it on hardest, you're still gonna have a hard time fighting these enemies. So you just might as well put it on the most difficult. At least you're gonna learn, you know, the most amount of things from the game and what the game has to offer. But yeah, if you manage to go through that, the game opens up and it becomes really, really fun. But yeah, that's my review. It's kind of me revisiting this RPG, and I'm looking forward to Elex 2. It's gonna be interesting to see how much they had learned from Elex 1, and now with the higher budget, I hope that the jank is lowered, and they managed to up their game from this one, because Elex 1 was solid. And we'll see what Elex 2 is gonna bring to the table. But nevertheless, tell me down below in the comments what do you think about all of this, and don't forget to also like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more. Also check us out on Twitter and Discord, and I do have a Patreon page. If you want to support the channel in an extra way, you can do it via the link below. This is again LKM signing out, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.